The story of the man we know as Abraham does not begin in a vacuum. It begins in the mud, the silt, and the staggering brilliance of the Fertile Crescent. Nearly 4,000 years ago, the world was not young in the way we often imagine. By the time Abram walked the streets of Ur, humanity had already been building cities for 2 millennia. The Great Pyramid of Giza was already nearly 700 years old, an ancient monument even to him. To the east and west, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers functioned as the twin pulse points of a sprawling, sophisticated organism, Mesopotamia. This was the land between the rivers, a region defined by an obsession with order, a mastery of water, and a terrifyingly complex relationship with the divine. Modern imagination often reduces the age of the patriarchs to a quiet, empty landscape of rolling dunes and solitary shepherds. The historical record suggests the opposite. The world Abram inhabited was loud, it was crowded, it was administratively dense, commercially aggressive, and religiously saturated. In the southern reaches of this world, near the Persian Gulf, sat the city of Ur. Before the migration, before the name change, before the covenant that would alter the trajectory of Western civilization, Abram was a man of the city. He was a product of the most advanced urban experiment in human history. To understand the gravity of his departure, we must first look at the walls he left behind. By 2000 BCE, Ur was a marvel of the Middle Bronze Age. It was the jewel of the Sumerian Renaissance. This was not a frontier outpost. It was a metropolitan hub where the world's first high society had reached its peak. Archaeology, spearheaded by the transformative excavations of Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s, reveals a city that would feel eerily familiar to a modern urbanite. Ur was a place of specialization. There were professional bakers, gold beaters, jewelers, and vintners. There were schools, eduba, the tablet houses, where young scribes spent years mastering the grueling complexity of cuneiform script. The economy of Ur was a masterpiece of logistics. We know this because they wrote everything down. Tens of thousands of clay tablets have been recovered, documenting a world of meticulous record-keeping. Receipts for the delivery of 3 sheep, contracts for the rental of an orchard, legal transcripts of inheritance disputes that dragged on for years, shipping manifestos detailing trade with Dilmun, modern Bahrain, and Meluhar, the Indus Valley. Abram lived in a world of contracts. When he eventually entered into a covenant with God, he was using a legal framework that his culture had perfected over centuries. He understood that a word given was a debt owed. In Ur, identity was not found in finding oneself. It was found in your place within the system. You were a son of a house, a member of a guild, a citizen of a district, and a servant of the gods. To be unaffiliated was to be non-existent. To walk through Abram's Ur was to move through a labyrinth of intentional design. The city was divided into distinct quarters: residential, commercial, and sacred. The homes of the wealthy were not tents. They were 2-story villas built of burnt brick and plaster. These houses were designed with an inward-facing logic. A heavy wooden door opened from a narrow shaded street into a central courtyard. This courtyard was the lungs of the home, providing light and ventilation, while shielding the family from the blistering Mesopotamian sun. Upstairs, balconies overlooked the court. Below, drainage systems, an incredible feat of engineering, carried wastewater away from the living quarters. These were homes built for permanence. They were built for families who intended to stay for 10 generations. Underneath the floors of many of these homes, the ancestors were buried. In the Mesopotamian mind, the living and the dead occupied the same space. You lived on top of your history. In the shadows of the temples, the bazaars hummed with a dozen languages. You would smell the pungent aroma of bitumen. used to waterproof boats, mixed with the scent of roasted grain and imported spices. Here, a man's worth was measured in silver shekels and grain measures. This was the stability Abram knew. A world where the walls were thick, the water was controlled by canals, and the future was as predictable as the rising of the moon. In the center of Ur rose the ziggurat. It was a man-made mountain of mud brick and bitumen, topped with a sanctuary that glowed with blue glazed tiles. This was the house of Nana, the moon god, the patron deity of Ur. Religion here was not a matter of personal faith, it was civic infrastructure. The gods were the celestial landowners of the city. The people were their tenant farmers. The relationship between heaven and earth was managed by a professional class of priests and priestesses. The Baru, diviners. They examined the livers of sacrificed sheep to read the handwriting of the gods. The Aspu, exorcists. They drove away the demons of plague and bad luck. The En, high priestesses. Often royal princesses, they ensured that the cosmic rhythms of the seasons remained unbroken. The gods were volatile. They were like the rivers, capable of bringing life, but prone to catastrophic flooding. To keep the world from falling into chaos, you followed the ritual. You brought the prescribed offerings at the prescribed time. You participated in the great processions. The divine spoke through signs, an eclipse, a birth defect in a goat, the flight of birds. Communication was institutional. It was filtered through the temple. It was mediated by the state. Then, into this world of managed divinity, the narrative introduces a rupture. The call of Abram, recorded in the opening of Genesis 12, is historically and theologically explosive because of what it lacks. In the context of Mesopotamia, divine communication followed a script. If a god wanted to speak to a man of Abram's status, it happened through a dream, an omen, or a priestly oracle. There was always a medium. There was always a context. But with Abram, there is only the voice. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. There is no ziggurat, no temple ritual, no sacrifice, no liver reading. The sovereign of the universe simply speaks to a citizen. This represents the first great deinstitutionalization of religion. The rupture was not just physical, it was a shift in the nature of reality. It suggested that the divine was not tied to a specific city-state or a specific blue-tiled sanctuary. For a man of Ur, this was terrifying. If God is not in the temple, where is he? If he is not tied to the land, how do we find him? The answer provided to Abram was radical. You find him in the walking. We often glaze over the command, leave your country, your kindred, and your father's house. To a modern individualistic ear, this sounds like a call to adventure. To a Bronze Age ear, it sounded like a death sentence. In the ancient Near East, you didn't have rights as an individual. You had protections as a member of a group. Country, territory. This was your legal jurisdiction. To leave your country was to become an apatride, a man without a state. You were no longer protected by the king's law. Kindred, clan. This was your social insurance. If you were wronged, your clan sought justice. If you were poor, your clan fed you. To leave your kindred was to lose your army. Father's house, inheritance. This was your economic identity. In a world before banks, your wealth was tied to the ancestral land. To leave your father's house was to walk away from your retirement, your security, and your legacy. Leaving Ur meant Abram was choosing to become a Habiru or Apiru, a term found in ancient texts referring to people who had cut themselves off from the social order. These were the marginalized, the migrants, the stateless. Abram was moving from the top of the social pyramid to the very bottom. He was trading the certainty of the city for the promise of the wilderness. The migration did not happen in a single leap. The family first moved north, following the great arc of the Fertile Crescent toward Haran. Why Haran? Haran was a sister city to Ur. Like Ur, it was a center for the worship of the moon god, Nana, called Sin in the north. Strategically located at a crossroads of trade routes between Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levant, Haran offered a halfway house. It was a place where they could still hear the echoes of the world they knew. They stayed there until Abram's father, Terah, died. It is here that the rupture becomes final. In Haran, Abram could have stayed and rebuilt Ur in the north. He had the wealth, he had the status, but the voice returned. The journey had to continue. This time, he wasn't just moving to a different branch of the same civilization, he was crossing the Euphrates. In Hebrew, the word for the one who crosses over is Ivri, the Hebrew. This is where the identity begins, not in the arrival, but in the crossing. When Abram turned south toward Canaan, he entered a world that was geopolitically fractured. Unlike the massive unified empires of Mesopotamia, Canaan was a patchwork of small city-states, fortified hill towns, and open grazing lands. His life changed from one of bricks to one of skins. The tent was not a symbol of poverty, it was a symbol of strategic mobility. To survive as a semi-nomadic pastoralist in the Middle Bronze Age required a sophisticated understanding of ecology and diplomacy. In the Negev and the Judean hills, water was more valuable than gold. To dig a well was an act of war or a gesture of treaty. Abram could not hide behind city walls. Every time his flocks entered a new valley, he had to negotiate with the local kings, men who ruled over towns like Shechem, Bethel, and Ai. He was a prince of the desert, but a prince without a castle. His security was now based on alliances and relational trust, rather than administrative law. In Mesopotamia, the gods lived in temples. In Canaan, Abram built altars. This shift is subtle but profound. An altar is a temporary marker. It is a claim made in a foreign land. Wherever Abram stopped, Shechem, Bethel, Hebron, he built an altar. He was mapping the land with his worship. He was living in the tension of the promise. He was told the land would be his, yet he was a resident alien. He was told his descendants would be like the stars, yet his wife Sarai remained barren. In Ur, you saw the results of your labor immediately. You built a wall. It stood. You planted a field. It grew. In the life of the covenant, you lived for a future you could not see. You traded sight for hearing. The Great Rupture was not just a religious event, it was a geopolitical anomaly. Canaan was the land bridge between the two great superpowers of the day, Mesopotamia to the north and Egypt to the south. It was a corridor of constant military movement and cultural exchange. For a single household to maintain its identity in this crush zone without a city to protect them was historically impossible. And yet, Abram survived. He survived the famine that drove him to Egypt. He survived the conflict with his nephew Lot. He survived the War of the Nine Kings, where he acted as a military commander, leading a strike force of 318 trained men from his own household. This reveals that Abram's household was essentially a mobile city-state. He had replaced the bureaucracy of Ur with the Brotherhood of the Covenant. Abraham is often called the father of faith, but he was also the architect of the new trajectory. Before he was a patriarch, he was a citizen who chose to walk away. His departure from Ur did not cause the towers of Mesopotamia to fall. The ziggurats would stand for centuries more. The scribes would continue to count their grain on clay tablets. The priests would continue to scan the stars for omens. But the rupture had introduced a new way of being human. It introduced the idea that history has a direction. It introduced the idea that God is personal and mobile. It introduced the idea that faith is a journey. Abraham became the foundation for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Not because he conquered the world, but because he was willing to leave it. He walked out of the shadows of the great temples. He stepped away from the architecture of certainty. He turned his back on the stability of the rivers and set his face toward the silence of the desert. Before the law of Moses, before the kingdoms of David and Solomon, before the written word of the prophets. There was a decision made by a man in a brick-lined street. He heard a voice. He packed his tents. He walked away, and history followed the direction of his steps.